crossing the thin blue line. We're asking if police in the US are killing too many people. Also on today's program, the three colors of the French tricolor. What the football team says about the fault lines in France's fractured society. And in picture this, a bridge over troubled water. Thousands of Venezuelans flood into Colombia to buy food and medicine. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garza. Figures are hard to come by when it comes to police killings in the US. There's no official number, no official confirmation of what we know. But reports suggest that US police kill many times more people than any European country. The issue has become even more prominent in recent years, with killings recorded and shared across social media. That's led to protests throughout the US and the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement. And the authorities' reaction to those protests has highlighted another trend: the increasing militarization of America's police forces. Today's newsmaker is the US police, as we ask why they're killing so many more people than their European counterparts.
America has the largest prison population in the world. And of the over 2 million men, women, children who make up the incarcerated, the overwhelming majority is Black. They are the most unemployed, the most caught in the unjust systems of justice. And in the gun game, we are the most hunted. Where is the raised voice of Black America? Why are we mute?
The silence has been broken. The videos keep coming, adding fuel to the fire. A consequence, perhaps, of deferred dreams collapsing. Many say police brutality against Black communities today is inextricably linked to America's troubled past.
Police somehow manage to de-escalate, disarm, and not kill white people every day. So what's going to happen is we are going to have equal rights and justice in our own country, or we will restructure their function and ours.
The shootings in Dallas are not the first instance of a violent backlash against police. 2 police officers were targeted and killed in December 2014 in New York. Police groups have decried what they call a war on cops. The St. Louis Police Officers Association and others have taken direct aim at President Barack Obama for his comments acknowledging police discrimination.
Across our criminal justice system, there are biases, some conscious and unconscious, that have to be rooted out.
It's a problem with many parts. One is said to be racial, another cultural. Bobbies in the UK, Gendarmerie in France, and the Bundespolizei in Germany. Each of these countries have their own internal racial and ethnic divisions. But there's one thing that they don't have to deal with: guns everywhere. The proliferation of firearms partly explains the way US police forces are trained: shoot to kill. Research carried out by the Guardians Project, The Counted, shows that more people are killed by police in America in days than in other countries in years. To legally kill someone, police only need to have a reasonable belief that they face a threat. They don't need to have someone pull a gun on them. Something that's open to legal interpretation, and few charges and convictions as a result. What some call impunity in cases of excessive force.
Out of the car.
Police brutality has become an increasing cause for concern in America, and many argue the videos show anyone can fall victim to an overzealous officer.
Told you.
But young African-American men are predominantly those who are dying. And activists say that's a reflection of racial fear and distrust, and a consequence of a culture that advocates shoot first and ask questions later. Randolph Nogle, The Newsmakers.
Well, let's discuss this further with 2 guests from the U.S. In Oklahoma is Keith Humphrey. He's the president of the National Black Police Association and police chief of Norman, Oklahoma. And in Washington, D.C., we have Christopher Harris, the Executive Director of Unhyphenated America. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. Chris Harris, let's start with you. Why does it seem as if the United States is an outlier, not against, say, Brazil or South Africa or Honduras, but against other wealthy industrialized countries, particularly the European countries, when it comes to cops killing people, particularly cops killing young black men?
Well, Imran, I think you have to put things in a proper perspective and look at where these are taking place. If you can take a look at Chicago, for example, I mean, that's the biggest outlier. They had, in 2015, they had 2,996 shootings in Chicago in that year, but only 25 of them were police officer involved. And out of the 508 homicides that took place in Chicago that year, only 9 were police officer related. So the biggest thing is that the majority of the people who were killed in Chicago, just Chicago alone, we're not talking about the rest of the country, just Chicago alone, over 400 black men were killed in Chicago in that 1 year. But if you look back, I think the latest stats to show, the FBI stats to show homicides, or excuse me, shootings by police officers by race, it was 2014, and black people were 244, I believe, was the number of black people who were shot and killed by police officers, compared to, I think, nearly over 500 white people who were shot and killed by police officers.
But they are,
so,
I mean,
you know, when you start looking at the stats...
Okay, but black people are 12% of the population in the United States, right? So we have to factor that in.
Yes. And black people also commit, unfortunately, listen, this is something that we all talk about within the black community, and I'm sure Chief Humphreys knows, is that quiet is kept. When we're all alone, we all talk about the problems in our community, and we know who's committing the crimes. One of the things I have an issue with is that 2,996 shootings, and, you know, where's the video cameras? This is the thing, is that, and I think, Chief Humphreys, you talk about community policing. Well, you know, that's a relationship between the police and the community. And that's one of the things that doesn't exist in places like Chicago, and you have to look at the culture. Yes, it does come down to culture. Culture matters.
Culture matters, and we need a relationship between police and the communities. Then let me pose this to Keith Humphrey. How come you have a place like Dallas, Texas, where they were seen as a success story in terms of the police's relationship with the people, yet you had 5 cops gunned down by someone who was very, very angry, citing structural problems? What's going on?
Well, I don't know if we'll ever know the true story of what that suspect was thinking. I think that you have these individuals that want to be known as martyrs, and I think they look for opportunities. You know, that the protest or the gathering was very, very successful. As a matter of fact, if you look at some of the video and some of the photos, you had officers taking pictures with citizens, shaking hands with citizens. I think it was a textbook protest where citizens were allowed to enforce their constitutional rights. And then you have someone who just ruined the day, who devastated a community for his own good. I mean, I don't know if it's because of the incidents that have occurred the last week or over the last 2 days. We may never know. I mean, that's what people say. That's what the belief is. But however, I think you have individuals that you know, they're looking out for themselves, and they're trying to make a point, and they want to be known as martyrs.
Christopher, at the moment, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile cannot defend themselves. They're dead. But if the facts emerge and history exonerates them, and it proves categorically that, hey, they should not have been shot dead, they did nothing wrong, would you concede to the Black Lives Matter movement that, hey, on this, you guys are right, and we have a problem in this country?
When you say, once again, do we have a problem in this country? If you find 2 people who were shot out of how many shootings? You know, 2 out of 1,000, and you say that's a problem? I don't think that's intellectually honest at all. I'm sorry, you can't. I mean, nobody would ever say that, oh, I found, you know, 2% and this is a massive problem. No, massive problem is 98%.
So you wouldn't consider it a problem?
Well, here's the thing. Well, every loss of life is a problem, especially for those who, you know, those who are left behind, the family, the grieving widows, the grieving children. All those are a problem. But if you're looking at a bigger thing, and I think it was, I hate to quote, I believe it was Stalin, who said, is that here's one of the things that they try to tell people. Stalin said is that one death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic.
Okay, Keith
this
Humphrey.
is one of the things that they were pointing out, is that...
Okay, let me go to Keith Humphrey. I want to move on for a second. The former Philadelphia Police Commissioner, Charles Ramsey, was on Meet the Press this past weekend, Mr. Humphrey. Ramsey, of course, was appointed by President Obama to lead a White House policing task force in 2014. He told Meet the Press that the United States is facing a volatile time. He said, we're sitting on a powder keg. You can call it a powder keg. You can say that we're handling nitroglycerin. But obviously, when you just look at what's going on, we're on in a very, very critical point in the history of this country. And the conventions, the Democratic and Republican conventions, are going to be very, very challenging to handle. And I don't think they're going to go without some incident taking place. Man, when I read this, I'm utterly depressed reading this from Charles Ramsey. Is he right, Mr. Humphrey? Is there trouble ahead?
Well, I think any day, as a law enforcement officer, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. But the fact is, yes. I think that there are some concerns. And I think people want to have their voices heard. And I think a lot of it is preparation. I mean, have you made contact with the individuals that are spearheading these protests? What is the purpose of the protests? What are they trying to accomplish? I think there's a way to work these things out. I don't want to say it's a powder keg. I think what you see is that law enforcement is being held accountable or being, we've always said that law enforcement, we're always looked at, held to a higher standard. And I think what you're looking at now and throughout the country is that citizens are saying, okay, you've said that, and okay, now you've talked the talk, it's time to walk the walk. Hold our law enforcement agencies to a higher standard, hold the officers to a higher standard. But I will tell you, Chris, I really appreciate what you said. I respect that, is that 98%, we have almost 20,000 law enforcement agencies in the nation, and we have over 1 million officers in the nation. And so to say that the majority of these officers and these departments are corrupt, or that they're teaching their officers to focus on minorities is unfair. And so I appreciate, Chris, what you said. But, I know there's a concern. I think that there will be protests outside of both conventions, but I think that they can be handled appropriately. And just one last thing, it's not the overall crowd that causes the problem. All it takes is one or two people to incite an issue, and then it's spread like a disease. All you need is just one cell in a body to cause havoc on your body. And so I think it's the same way with these groups. It's not the entire groups. I think these protests are started out, the intention is to be peaceful. And if for some reason you have individuals that feel like the only way to get the attention of the city and of the nation is to cause havoc.
Interesting point regarding incitement, which leads me to my final question, Chris. Leadership from the very top down, from the president down, are they inflaming or calming the situation?
I'm glad you asked that question. I was going to address it, but since you brought it up, that helps. I'm always going to come at everything from a Christian perspective, and here's what I'm telling you, is that what this nation needs is prayer for healing. Instead of trying to incite further strife, which if you ask me personally, I think the president and this administration and many other people are out there trying to fan the flames. And you have to ask why. Well, they benefit from it because when there's more strife, they're able to do other things and people are distracted. Everything else is going on. Hey, if, we can get people, it's the sleight of hand, right? Watch this hand, watch that hand. This sleight of hand that's taking place, distracting people. The president promised to be a uniter. Well, from everything I've seen for almost 8 years now, he's been a divider. Every time there's any sort of these shootings, instead of calling for peace and calm, instead of saying, hey, we're all Americans. And that's one of the things that we talk about with Unhyphenated America, is that if you understand and believe in the principles of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, then you're an American. You're not a black American, you're not an African American, you're not an Asian American or white American, you're just an American. And when you understand that and you promote that, which is something the president should be promoting, we're all Americans, and it's much deeper than just something as superficial as the color of your skin. Stop promoting that, Mr. President.
Okay, Keith Humphrey and Christopher Harris, I've got to wrap. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, flying the flag, how France's football team reflects its society. And in Picture This, the reason why tens of thousands of Venezuelans are crossing into Colombia. France won their first ever World Cup at home in 1998. Their team, known as the Blanc, Beur, was seen as the pinnacle of France's successful immigration policy and integrated society. 18 years after that success, France has just hosted another major football tournament. But the build-up was marred by a row over race and selection policy. So what does it say about French society? The Newsmakers Francis Collings explains.
It was the time when a country came together, when the French World Cup winning team of 1998 became a social phenomenon. Inspired by the genius of Zinedine Zidane, marshalled by the discipline of the captain Didier Deschamps, two contrasting characters represented a multicultural nation. The so-called Blanc, Beur team of '98 offered a view of a truly integrated society. After all, this was a rainbow team, a winning team, and France celebrated. But perhaps it was a false dawn on a social and sporting level. The well-integrated society that was symbolized by the '98 team of Zidane, Desailly and Blanc was creaking. Matters came to a head in 2005. The deaths of two French youths of Tunisian and Malian descent sparked riots across France that lasted for 3 weeks. A state of national emergency was declared as more than 9,000 vehicles and dozens of public buildings and businesses were set on fire. The overwhelming message that emerged was that far from being integrated, France was fractured, and many people of immigrant descent felt like second-class citizens, excluded from society. Fast forward 18 years, Didier Deschamps is now the coach, and the team was winning again. But this is a different side, a different society.
I think it's something that France needs right now too. I mean, it's finally some positive press and a positive thing to happen to the country.
The team may be ethnically diverse, but there were problems. Star striker Karim Benzema was left out. He's involved in a court case over allegations of blackmail and extortion of a teammate. But according to Benzema, Deschamps, the coach, bowed to the pressure of a racist part of France. Euro 2016 was a sporting event that took place against the grimmest of backgrounds. 130 people were killed last November in attacks on cafes, a music theatre and the Stade de France, where the team were playing a game. That football and music fans were targeted in terror attacks was disturbing. More worrying was the fact that some of the attackers were homegrown, that France could produce its own terrorists from the same type of suburbs that had provided half the team of 1998 was an unpalatable thought. Perhaps the legacy of the glory days of 18 years ago is that fairly or unfairly since then, France's football squad is seen as the representation of its society at large. Francis Collings, The Newsmakers.
Well, joining me now to discuss France's national team and the debate about national identity is Samindra Kunti, who's a football journalist at Inside World Football in Paris. Thank you very much for joining us, Samindra. So France fell short. Great disappointment for them, losing to Portugal. But I wonder, what was the spirit like in 2016 compared to the spirit of 1998 when they won the World Cup at home?
That's a very good question. I think the spirit is very different because the context is very different. Now, back in 1998, France hosted the World Cup, which compared to the European Championship is a far larger and far more important major international tournament. And Zinedine Zidane, by scoring 2 goals in that final on July 12th against the mighty Brazilians, became a national star immediately. That same night, his image was projected on the Arc de Triomphe here at the Champs-Élysées, and France reveled in a footballing ecstasy. But the game transcended football in the sense that it united the country. There was a belief, a genuine optimism that France could create a post-colonial national identity. But if you look at 2016 and this victory, if you look at the French team, the makeup is still very much the same. A lot of players have ancestral roots abroad.
Okay, then let me ask you. So you have Paul Pogba, Blaise Matuidi, Patrice Evra, Bakary Sagna. These are top players, first-team players for France. Are they not heroes to all of French society?
I would feel inclined to say no. First of all, you have to understand that French society doesn't have the same intimate relationship with football as some other Western European nations. Germany and England were very industrialized countries. So there the working class really embraced the so-called beautiful game. But here in France, that's slightly different. France is not as industrialized. And you only have 1 or 2 cities, I would say Saint-Etienne, for example, Marseille, for example, that you could give the tag of being really football mad. So first of all, France doesn't have such, football doesn't hold such an important role in French society. And then secondly, obviously the nature of the game, football is a transitory game. So over the course of 90 minutes, you can't really change society, I would say. And an interesting point here is you mentioned Matuidi, Evra. Those would typically be the players that would get selected for the National Training Center in Clairefontaine, which is like a prestige university for football development. There they are developed far away from ordinary French citizens, and once they reach the age of, say, 15, 16, they are usually lured to big international clubs. So they move out of French society on merit, you have to say on merit, fairly early. So they live in a very different world that has very little to do, and I think it's difficult, especially for a new generation of French citizens to identify with these posh footballers in spite of getting there on merit.
Question for you. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I have one final question for you. There was a claim, particularly coming from former French international and actor Eric Cantona, that coach Didier Deschamps had discriminated against Arab and North African players by not including them in the team, Karim Benzema, Hatem Ben Arfa, and so on. Does that have any validity whatsoever?
Well, you know, the French national team, Le Bleu, is in French society, it's the ultimate vehicle to discuss national identity. And so when France does well, like in '98, and even at the Euro 2016, despite losing the final, when France does well, Le Bleus are seen as something positive, as a cause for optimism that France can finally get and achieve that post-colonial national identity and unite as a nation. But when France doesn't do well, obviously the team is criticized, and that multicultural idea is then disliked and perceived as something negative. So I would say that there is no validity in Cantona's claims. Didier Deschamps and his backroom staff select players based on their qualities, and we clearly saw that at the Euros. They select players on their quality and not based on the color of their skin.
Okay, Samindra, I had so much more I wanted to ask you, but unfortunately we are out of time. Samindra Kunti, thank you very much for joining us. In today's Picture This, tens of thousands of Venezuelans have crossed into Colombia to get food and basic goods. Let's take a look.
Comida, no tenemos aceite, no tenemos harina. Entonces, ¿qué nos toca? Que venir aquí.
Today's newsmaker has been US police, as we asked why they kill so many more people than their European counterparts. The simple explanation would be that the US has far more relaxed gun laws, and they face a greater threat, the risk that anyone they apprehend could be armed. But the events of the past week show that police also face different dangers to their European counterparts and a different relationship with the people they serve. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. As always, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.